We are now recording.
All right.
So, can I use your name on camera?
Penelope?
Sure. Okay. So, Penelope, first question is, what is most important?
Most important, I'm assuming you're saying to me, because I can't say what's important to other people.
I try to leave that open-ended, and
Okay.
frequently people say important to what. My response is to put it in any context you wish, and as many contexts as you wish.
Okay. I'm just going to say what's important to me. And the people interactions I have, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise, because every one of them has value. And I learn from it if nobody else learns from it. So that I have found as I get older and older, the most rewarding are the people interactions. Not being with a crowd of people, but more the one-on-one, two-on-one type of interactions.
Making connections with people is one I've gotten before, and that sounds very similar. Okay. The second one is probably the longer one. Initially it was even bigger, but right now it's, what is your history with religion, and at what point did you decide it was or was not for you? And few people have gone back and forth, and so just let's hear your history on religion.
Oh my goodness. Well, first off, I am very empathetic, and I have learned in retrospect that I used to hear my parents' thoughts sometimes, because there were things that I thought they told me, and knowing my parents and what the subject matter was, they didn't. But neither of my parents were really religious. But my mom, and this is why I know she didn't tell me, because I was about 7 years old when friends took us to Sunday school. And she wanted us to go because literature has a lot of references to the biblical stories. And so for us to really understand literature, we need to understand what those stories are. So I know she didn't tell me that as a 7-year-old. And I enjoyed it up until I was 10 years old, when I asked a question, and the answer was, you don't question, you just believe. And my little 10-year-old mind said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. and the idea of God that they had, I thought was rather stupid too, because it was like there was a lot of people that I knew were not nice. And why would God want these people telling him how great he is, when there are people that I wouldn't even want to have tell me that I was a good girl? And so I thought, well, all these people are trying to make God like them, and what I feel is something more, that I want to be like what I feel. And so I kept looking. I went to every denomination a friend went to, but I never found it. And in my, let's see, I started at Aerojet in 1962, so right about then I decided, well, people make up religions, I'll make up my own. So I created what I called my own religion, and it was based on things from the Bible that hit my heart, and things from, I was a science fiction lover from the time I discovered science fiction. I think it was about
You and
12.
I are going to get along.
And so it was things that I read in the science fiction books. So it was a philosophy, probably more than a religion, that I decided this is how I want to live my life. And in the 80s, this was a personal development workshop that was the first time I ever heard anybody else begin to voice some of the things that I had in my own personal religion. And it was so cool, because so that was my first exposure to, well, there's things that are more, because I grew up in the 50s. I was a teenager in the 50s, and a lot of the metaphysical books that are available now were not available then. And if you thought that way, you didn't speak about it in the 50s.
I'd say a lot of the metaphysical stuff today is probably based on a lot of that existed back then and earlier too.
Yeah.
But it has evolved, and I didn't want to interrupt. I just
Right.
want to comment.
No, it just wasn't available unless you really knew the bookstore. Because I think it was in the late 70s I discovered, oh, what is her name? She was in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. She wrote a treatise on white magic, and I discovered that. It was, but it was like what she was writing. It was almost like, well, maybe that applied at one time, but I don't think it does anymore. But anyway, I consider the time when I was 10 to when I was 50, my 40 years in the desert, you know, kind of like with the Israelites.
Okay, okay.
And when I bought my house where I live now in Oak Park, I knew at that time it was a pretty challenged neighborhood. And in meditation I asked, you know, what can I do to protect my home? And I heard have a blessing done. So I knew a friend who had owned a metaphysical store, and so I asked her if she knew anybody that did home blessings, because I was looking for a white witch. I knew they did it, and I knew priests did it, and I didn't want a priest. So, and that's how I met the person who is now the, you might say my Tao, which is a teacher like a guru, and has been for 25 years. And he came. He's the same age as my son, so I talked with him, and I thought, oh, he's this very mature, elderly man, and he's like 28 years old when he comes into my house. And he did this amazing ceremony. And a couple of the students were teaching, so that's how I first got exposed to this, what we call Gnostic Christianity. And we use the esoteric teachings directly from Judaism, because Yeshua was a Jew, and so and it just became something that's spoken to my heart and made my life really amazing.
That's cool. I'm a little jealous because I haven't experienced that. I'm too, I wouldn't say strong-willed, too independent, that's not right. Maybe stubborn is the right word.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm open to many things. In college, somebody, I can't remember the name of them, but you see them at airports sometimes, at least what they show them in the movies. The guys with the robes and monks and passing out flowers.
Oh, Hare Krishnas.
Yes, yes. A couple of them had showed up at Sac State, and there was not a lot of attendance, but, you know, I showed up. I'm like, well, what do you guys got? They wanted me to repeat a phrase, and they didn't know what it meant. I'm like, sorry, I'm not doing it. You know, I don't know what Govinda Rama is or who that is, and I could be saying, I hope God rapes me in the butt, for all I know.
Right, right.
Obviously, that's not going to be what they're saying, but I still don't, you know, I'm not going to repeat anything. And they said, well, how about some of these pamphlets? And oh, well, this one's interesting. I picked up like 3 or 4 of them, and so I dropped them a couple of bucks or something. There was another student and his father were there, and they didn't really seem to get it either. They were just kind of looking also, and we didn't find anything with them, but it was a polite conversation. That was about it.
Yeah, I did look into the Eastern traditions, and they have a lot that I felt was valuable, but the whole focus that the only reason we're here is to get out of here it was like, well, that's not a good enough reason for here to be here. So that didn't make sense to me.
No, and other people have talked about, in regards to religion, they're just too apathetic about their current life. They don't care about the environment because they're not going to be here when they die. You know, and they treat everybody badly because they're not going to be here, you know, when they die.
How is that a religion? How is that anything that's beneficial?
It's not. It's completely selfish. It might be beneficial immediately to them as far as they see it, but I can't see it in any other way.
If there's a religion that makes one more selfish and self-absorbed, I would say that maybe the gods that created it may not be the ones you want to be hanging with.
Yeah. Just couldn't hang with people who are terribly religious, and my parents didn't get married, so I'm a bastard child, so that means I'm not allowed in any of the 3 major religions. Not ever, not even in 10 generations, according to Deuteronomy 23:2. I don't know what the Muslims have to say, but the one gal I met at one of the atheist meetings who was former Muslim, you know, I don't know anything about it, so you mind if I ask questions? So she said, yeah, they don't approve if your parents weren't married.
That is right. You have so much control over them. What kind of compassionate God would allow a child to be brought out of the womb and condemned from the time they're born? Well, that is so stupid.
And the funny thing is now that they want life to begin at conception, that means that shotgun weddings don't work anymore. You know.
Not with that ridiculous output.
No.
In my view, those viewpoints are just points that allow more power. And therefore, they have nothing to do with a source that creates. It's a destructive source.
They want to separate others from themselves.
Right.
Especially others that they don't feel they have any control over.
And how could that have anything to do with the source that created everything?
It doesn't. It's purely human.
Yeah. It's just human creation and human tribalism.
The sci-fi books that I've been enjoying, Larry Niven, the Ringworld trilogy, have you read those?
Years and years ago.
I forget what her name was, but there was this girl who was like 5th generation born from the population birth lottery, whatever it is on Earth in the future.
Okay.
So in order to handle the population, they only allow so many people to have a breeding license, as it were.
Right.
They have to be healthy, and you know, if you're really healthy, you get a free pass. Otherwise, you have to apply. Well, this one gal was a result of 5 or 6 generations of winning the lottery and being able to be born. This was prearranged by this alien race they call the puppeteers.
Okay, yeah.
Because they wanted to breed luck into humanity.
Breed luck?
Yes.
So they only... Well, according to astrologers, that means what time of year are you born?
Well, but you have to be lucky in order to win the lottery, right?
Yeah.
So it's domesticating luck.
Okay.
The thing about religion and bastard children is if 2 people don't believe enough to follow their ridiculous marriage rituals, then we don't want that in our gene pool. So they are domesticating people. They are breeding obedience.
Well, it sounds very similar to the Nazis' view of creating the master race.
Eugenics.
And when you have that type of viewpoint, it's very easy for genocide to be justified.
Yep.
And
it's awful.
It is. But I have a feeling most of the wisdom traditions didn't start that way. They became interpreted, and the further away it got from the individual that said, "Ooh, I understand this, I see this, let me share it with you," the less the people really experienced what was being shared, and so the more closed down it became.
Well, and with the media being it as it was in the days of Jesus, no one has any idea what he really said. Only the witnesses and the people controlling that information.
But that is true, and there's been a lot of writings found since then that have been hidden. And you know, in Tibetan Buddhism, which is a pretty cool way of looking at things too, they have what they call termas. And so somebody who became a Buddha would write their story for future generations and hide it. And then a person might find it, translate it, and it brings message for future generations. Like there was a writing found, it's called Pista Sophia, found in the 1600s. It's a really cool writing. And then in the 40s, the Nag Hammadi find was discovered, and that's been translated. There's some cool scripture in there. And of course the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're very different. So if you look at that, and then you look at the ancient Judaic tradition of Kabbalah, and know that the Hebrew language is numbers and letters simultaneously. And so there's, in Hebrew, if you look at the Hebrew words, the words that have the same numeric value are related. And they have, so if you know the language, you get a deeper meaning. And the language that was spoken at the time Yeshua walked in the world, assuming he walked in the world, he would have spoken, oh my goodness, it's right there. Anyway, it's a language that every word has 3 levels of meaning. It has a more worldly level, it has a more emotional, psychological level, and it has a spiritual level. So if you take that language and then translate it into, let's say, Latin, and then into this language, you have lost so much. It becomes this little one-dimensional thing that sounds like, that can easily be turned into dogma.
Like the difference between thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not murder.
Yeah, and there's this one, it's a priest in France who wrote a commentary on the Gospel of Mary, and it's fragments attributed to sharings of Mary Magdalene to the other apostles after Yeshua died. And he was saying in his commentary that you could also have the commandments be translated as maybe you shouldn't do this. You may, it wasn't a command. It was saying, and it's almost like saying, well, look into the reason why this is being said. What happens if this is allowed? And the first one, that's translated into, love your Lord your God, and that's the first one. Well,
and no other.
Well, if there's a source, I have a feeling that the source is the source. Start with the Big Bang, that's the source, right? Whatever. And probably we have a lot of gods that we've created. So if we look at just the source, which is a mystery, which we can't even figure out because it's pre-everything, then you don't have to understand God. Because our little itty-bitty minds, I doubt if we could understand something that creates the cosmos.
Well, amongst the mistranslations, there is also corrupt intention to just control it all.
Of course there is, yeah.
I think Jesus more likely said, only through yourself can you be saved.
And that's what Gnosticism is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Gnosticism essentially says, and there's lots of branches of it. I mean, it just is, gnosis mean you understand, you know through experience. And in our tradition, it's like, these are teachings that those who before us have shared. These are teachings that those who are here have realized. Don't believe them. Take, contemplate, see what applies to you. So you can create your own gospel to share. So I think that's what you're saying there.
I figure anyone that heard him say that might have repeated that and said, hey, he said, you know, I only need myself. And maybe someone misinterpreted that. It's like, you only need him? And so a corporate bastard might go, hey, we could use that. Only through Jesus can you be saved. And Jesus is gone now, so only, you know, whatever I say Jesus said, you know, you have to pay attention to.
But then we can't say it's only me either.
No, they say it's only through him.
But
they hold him up as
we can't say
their
it's
own.
only through myself either. Because we come in the world and we through our experiences, we get a lot of glitches. And our way of responding to things are not always really beneficial.
It certainly helps to have help.
So you might say, what if everything's truly interconnected, that the separation we think we see doesn't really exist?
That's manufactured as well.
Well, it's necessary. This is part of, you know.
Yeah.
But what if it isn't the only way of seeing things? What if it's true yet not true, depending upon one's experience of it at a particular time? Because I think part of religion is trying to pretend there's nothing like a paradox. And there's paradoxes all over the place.
Yeah. I definitely enjoy these kinds of conversations.
I do too. That's why I go.
I'm inclined to move on to my third question.
Okay.
This is my playful question.
Okay.
And it goes in two different directions, so I asked both questions. Originally it was if you were a superhero, what would your power be, and what would your superhero name be? Now, personally, I would like to know what in your real life, something people might think you're a hero for. And then the second part is, if you were in a movie or a comic book or cartoon, what would you like to have as a superpower? And the name is really superfluous. I go by Fence Walker, that's my superhero name.
Right. That's the toughest question I've had so far.
This is another one where people go,
Yeah, so let's see.
And you can go with real life or fantasy first, it doesn't matter.
Well, real life has fantasy enough, so I don't need to go with fantasy. I think our brains are there most of the time anyway. This is the way the world is, right? Well, yep, that's a good fantasy there too. Anyway, let me see. Oh, gracious.
See right there, where you and you have to take a breath to refresh the brain.
Yeah. That, I've never really wanted a superpower, so it's something that I've just have to really ponder.
Maybe a friend or a family member will go, wow, that Penelope, you should get to know her because she experienced this, or she can do this, or, what kind of story might make you a hero? Well,
they did write an article about me in the Bee years ago. This was when I was recovering from the brain injury that I received as a result of the car accident. And the kids discovered I was home. And at that time in Oak Park, there were, oh my gosh, there must have been 100 kids living on my street. And so they would end up at my house, and I would go to garage sales and get, cheap instruments, musical instruments, and friends would give me toys and games because they knew the kids hung out there. And it was really cool because my brain, I couldn't really hang with adults. Adults take a lot of energy and entertainment. Kids can entertain themselves, and they're just good company.
Probably another reason you and I would get along really well.
So, yeah, because I wouldn't be able to do much of anything. My brain was really compromised. And I'd have 9, 10 kids playing on the floor in my living room, and I have a tiny living room. And I'd be able to read my book, and I feel that there was a connection with others. And, but
So you were like the cool parent.
I was the safe house. Because
Yeah.
many of these
Yeah.
kids lived in drug houses. And it was good because if I saw drug activity, I would always call 911. And you know, people who are in drugs, they still love their kids. And they knew the kids were safe at my house and that they could send them over if they were doing stuff they didn't want their kids to see. And so I didn't get anything more than their anger when I did it. I didn't get repercussions. So the kids were kind of like my little safety net for not going along with what was the norm at that time in the neighborhood. So that's the one thing
That really works. That is so heroic. I do kind of a similar thing with my apartment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here most of the time alone.
Right.
And whenever people come over here, I try to make it their paradise, their vacation spot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the one across the way really likes to watch Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I download it on my computer, and he gives me a call and says, hey, you know, if you're going to be up between these hours, I'd like to watch a show. And you come over and we do that.
Right.
My other friends will come over and just relax. And it's like, man, I'm sorry I don't feel like talking. I'm like, nope, that's what this place is for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you do what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
So I definitely groove on that. I don't know if I can handle the kids. I couldn't handle the screaming or any.
Oh no, they didn't.
Roughhousing.
They did not do
Really?
that. No, if they, almost every one of the kids stood in front of my house crying when I told them, well, you have to go home, because they couldn't comply. Either they wanted a toy somebody else had, or they wanted to bounce off the walls, and that only took one time. And that was so cool. The kids, especially the ones, they were very creative. Oh my God, I wanted so much for those kids to have that brightness in their eyes to continue. But their parents, especially the boys, started training them to be drug dealers by the time they were 11. But anyway, they would go, and I had a room where most of the toys were kept. It was one of the bedrooms kind of a junk room that accumulated everything. And they would go in there and they'd put the clothes, you know, I had clothes so they could dress up and stuff. And they'd come out and do concerts for me. And it was, oh my goodness, they were so talented. It was so much fun. And then they would get their Legos, or read, or do puzzles.
I had space Legos when I was a kid. Just could not play with them enough. Also erector sets, Lincoln logs, anything I could build stuff
Yeah, to
with.
build stuff. Yeah, the kids loved them. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't consider it heroic because they were helpful to me. And it was, without that, during that healing time, I would have felt very isolated. And it might not have been as quickly that my brain had healed through that. So maybe heroism isn't always what we think it is.
Whatever you want to call it, I'm going to call that heroic.
Okay.
That deserves high honors, you know. One friend who ended up not being a friend, we had agreed that it takes a village to raise a child.
Mm-hmm.
And frequently so many of us feel like children.
Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't ever go away.
Well, some of it needs to.
Yeah, well, yeah. But the curiosity, the interest, the delight, that is very childlike.
Yeah. So good. You were the neighborhood hero, so that's good.
Yeah, I was the safe house.
So, you never enjoyed seeing the cartoons with the kids, or movies, or comic books, or anything like that?
Let me see. I don't have a television.
Oh, well, good for you.
So, we would read stories. but they were so good at entertaining themselves and creating their own, you know, whatever, that they really didn't need any help. They just needed a place where they could relax. And they'd stay overnight sometimes, and we'd go to the store and get food. And one thing I learned, because I want this, can I have it? And with my kids, I would always say, well, you can't have it. And they'd get all upset. And I wish I knew this when my kids were small. I said, I know you really want it or you wouldn't ask for it, but I can't get it. And they would stop nagging. It was so simple.
I was in college once. This reminds me. Some woman had brought over a child, and she was doing business or something with my roommate, and the kid was just, I want this and I want that, and you know, I said, well, why don't you come over here, you know, and I asked him what his favorite Power Ranger was, you know, something he might understand, and he asked, he seemed to be complaining about how his mother was ignoring him, and I tried to explain, well, I think your mother's busy right now, and I don't think yelling at her about wanting to go somewhere or get something is really the right way of going about it.
Yeah.
If you could ask her calmly, you know, when she has a moment, you know, try that. And before I knew it, he was over waiting by her to stop speaking. You know, I couldn't even hear him from across the room.
Wow.
I think I heard him say, "Mommy, could I?" and that was about it. And she put her hand on his shoulder, and he's like, "No, I can't do that right now." And they both spoke to each other calmly. It was so awesome.
Yeah.
Then he walked back over here, and he's like, "It didn't work. I asked nicely." I'm like, "Well, I guess that means she's really busy." You know, does that make sense to you? He's like, "I guess." You know, and I've never been a parent, but that's as close as I get. And that story actually reminds me of another one in college. I was over at a buddy's place. We were studying together, and his son was getting a little wild, as it were.
Right.
And my friend Darren, it was beautiful. Someone asked me once, what's the most amazing thing you've ever witnessed, and this is one of them, where he just said, no, Brett, you need to understand, you know, what's going on here, and that's not appropriate behavior. And he's like, are you okay with that? And he's like, yeah, I guess. And he walked off. I'm like, wow, you know, what a father.
Yeah.
You know, my dad never did shit like that.
Right.
You know, my dad, he'd take me to learn how to ride a bicycle and would just laugh at me when I dropped it. You know, and
yeah, that's the old time thinking that everybody says we need to go back to.
Yeah,
the good old days. Yeah.
No, we do not.
I totally agree.
Okay, so and I do ad lib a lot on these things too, so it's just a conversation, really. So you couldn't think of any like flying or X-ray vision or, you know, foretelling the future. Another one I get is having access to whatever knowledge they wanted. They didn't want to know everything because they know there are things you don't want to know.
Right.
But they wanted access to that knowledge.
You know, none of those.
None of those.
None of those, because if it's something appropriate for me, I'm drawn to it. I'll study it. And the way I gain the knowledge will be appropriate for me. That's assuming that anything, you know, a download is going to be able to be integrated, absorbed, used. And it takes, if I could just do that, what fun would be in exploring and curiosity, and that's all fun. And learning.
Yeah. Experimentation to learn.
Yeah. Being able to make mistakes and learn from those. Those are all cool.
I forget which big inventor said it. It was Tesla or somebody. He said, I didn't fail 100 times. I found 100 ways to not do it correctly.
Yeah, I've heard that
or something like that.
Attributed to Edison.
Yeah,
who knows who said it?
Yeah.
Who knows who said it?
Okay.
No, as a matter of, because I think that we get things as we are ready for them. And so I think a superpower is being able to let go of all that crap, relax, and just take each day and see what's really wonderful about it.
My favorite movie of all time is Fight Club, and one of the philosophies is just let it slide. You know, if it doesn't matter, let it go.
Yeah.
You know, those things that truly do not matter, and that really spoke to me. There's a bunch of parts of that movie that really speak to me, and it's not a friendly movie. It's not a family movie at all. It's dark and it's philosophical and it's violent and all those things.
Right.
But still, I love the philosophy of it, not so much the brutality. Right. Okay, my final question is, would you like to ask me any questions? And topic completely open.
Okay.
This is another one that gets people going,
Yeah. Yeah, because that's one of my desires, is to start learning how to ask questions, because it wasn't allowed in our household.
Oh.
Knowing how to ask questions is a skill. It's not, yeah.
Let me give you some advanced warning then.
What?
Because I've been asking questions ever since I can remember.
Yeah.
And just after my tumor, I took my first actual engineering course, electrical electronic stuff. And I kept asking him because he wasn't explaining it right. I'm like, that doesn't quite make sense. Do you mean this, that, and the other? And it's like, well, you know. And I really failed his class the first time I tried taking it. And that was immediately after the tumor. I took it by itself one semester. And he set me aside and he's like, do you realize that every time you ask a question and I answer it, that everybody is writing down the answer?
Yeah, because they all have the same question.
Yeah.
In that regard, I can ask a question.
Okay.
It depends upon the context.
Sure.
But in a social setting, after the fact, all kinds of questions come in. But in them, it's almost like observing and wondering what's happening. Because I remember wondering what was happening since I was very, very small. Not understanding people's motivations, what they do. And there was certain questions weren't allowed in the house. You know, if it had to do with academia, yeah, those were. But other things, and I didn't come from a family that really understood social interactions. My mom was first-generation immigrant, and my dad, his mother was divorced back in the early 1900s, so he was not part of what was considered acceptable in society either. So I think you learn how to ask questions when you feel comfortable in society. Academia is a whole different thing. It's a set.
I don't consider it a social thing at all. I ask questions because that's the easiest way to find out what the answer is. You know,
right.
If I can perform a test, I might. But usually, you know, with social, you don't want to poke and prod people, even with questions.
I do. That's why I don't ask questions.
Yeah.
Because when I do, maybe it's prodding too.
Well, and on that, I was working at some company. It was a tech company, and you had to work with all these circuit boards and this, that, and the other. And from college, I was electrical electronic engineer with a minor in physics, despite the brain tumor in the middle. So I kept asking him all these questions about, well, why is this switch on or off, and why we got to set it there? And it's like, well, blah, 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 blah. And like, that didn't really explain what I was asking. So it took a really long time, and what I found out was that the guy who was teaching me this stuff, he was really annoyed by all of my questions. He thought I was just trying to delay the whatever was going on. no, I'm trying to understand it.
Right, right.
And he couldn't understand why I asked so many questions. And finally he asked me that, and it's like, well, because I need to know. You know, that's the most easiest way to find out.
Right.
Yeah, and I think in 6 or 9 months, the turnaround was so high at that job that I was the most senior person in my team when I left after 6 or 9 months. And I was teaching other people what they had taught me.
Right.
And I said, you guys are pretty bad teachers. You need someone to be able to teach us well. It's like, well, you know, you need a good student first to become that teacher. I'm like, yeah, that's me right here,
right.
You know. So when I explained it to people, I was able to quiz them, you know, while I was doing it. Why do you think this? Well, you're wrong. It's because of this. You know, oh, I get it. And one guy actually passed the test the first time, and that's largely unheard of. I didn't pass it the first time either. You know, you get one little thing just off, and they, no, you do not understand what you're doing. It's like, because you didn't tell me. You know, I don't know what you're talking about, even when I ask questions. So be careful with people who think you're just trying to waste their time. Those are people who do not ask questions. They just seem to get it. And that was more of a directive, and I didn't mean it to be, but be aware that some people will think that you're just trying to, you know, be nattering and nitpicky. So that's my advice on question asking.
Thank you.
Would you like to ask me any more questions?
Okay. What was when my brain was healing, I had some pretty amazing experiences that went away as my brain healed. It was like some other way of interacting with the world became available because of the nerve damage in part of my brain. And as that healed, those other things disappeared. Not totally, but not so much to be aware of. And I was wondering, with your tumor, and it had to injure your brain because it was...
well, not just the tumor itself, but the procedures to take care of it.
Right. And I was wondering if you had some capacities that you didn't have before, that...
I definitely saw the world differently because my eyes were looking in different directions.
Right.
When I explained it to one of my physics teachers that I was not going to be able to take the final exam, I was also taking another physics class with his wife. So he said, well, listen carefully, because my wife has blah blah blah, and they wanted to actually insert a piece of radioactive material into her body, and we know physics, and we know that that's not a good thing.
Right.
One thing he pointed out, he's like, so do the trees seem a little bit greener to you now? I'm like, I have been noticing some things. You know, it is a different experience. I think that one of the huge steps, and I'm not sure if this directly relates to your question, we had watched some movie. It was a really depressing movie, not happy at all. It was called The Last Mile, I think, or The Final Mile. Essentially, a nuclear war happens. You know, people are living their day, going through their days, and no one's watching the news. It's just happening. You know, down the street there's a fire, and it's like, well, let the police take care of that. We'll go over here. It's like, well, now everybody's starting to race around, and everything's going, and you see all these things going off, and the world ends. And I had seen plenty of Holocaust movies. You know, some of my favorites are, you know, post-Holocaust adventures, you know, running around in a destroyed world, you know, Mad Max kind of thing.
Right.
But that was the first one I had seen after the tumor, and it wasn't playful like Mad Max or anything. It was grim and severe. You know, there was one scene where these cops are at a gas station, and someone ends up getting gasoline in his eyes, and his reaction was to fire his gun, which ignited him and just lit the whole gas station on fire. I'm like, why am I watching this? You know, what is all this? And you just start to go, well, one day that's going to be me. I'm going to be at the bottom of a pond somewhere, or buried, or ashes, or something. That's going to be me someday. And it hadn't really hit me that hard. And it's like, okay, I'm going to die. Now what do I do? You know, with the rest of my life.
Right.
And I was 20.
Yeah, because at 20 you usually don't start pondering that.
No, you're looking to start a career or get laid or all those things.
Right. You got a whole life ahead of you.
Yeah. You got out of college, you got out of high school, starting college, and just bam. The one strength I had going for me, I was not athletic, I was not social. I understood math and science. And now my brain has holes in it. I managed to finish my 4-year degree in 7.5 years.
I think that is...
Yeah, with a tumor in the middle.
Right, that's...
My GPA was a 3.0. In high school it was 288, so it actually went up. And I was very proud of that. I don't know how I got there from what changed with the tumor. And this isn't so much about the brains and perceptions, but I lost a lot of friends when the tumor happened.
Yep, I understand that totally. I had all kinds of people I've been interacting with for years, and afterwards there were maybe 2 that kept in touch. Yep.
Well, I still regularly see one every week, one once a month. I probably call him, talk to him more than that. Another one I don't see too often, but I went to high school with these 4 guys, and they went through part of that experience with me. They were at the hospital when I was recovering from my first surgery. So yeah, but the one that really bothered me was this one friend of mine. I was his best friend, he was my best friend. It was in the college years when he drove me out into the boonies to tell me that he was gay, which is not recommended, but you know, I'm like, hey, if you wanted my ass, I probably would have known by now, so, you know, what do you want to do about it? He's like, I don't know, I just wanted to tell you. And for some stupid reason, I couldn't drive a stick, so he's like, here, learn how to drive a stick. I'm like, okay, whatever. But we are out in buttfuck Egypt, so I backed the car up and ended up almost going down the embankment. They had levee systems, kind of, where the roads were.
So you almost went down the levee?
Yeah, but we didn't see it because there were a bunch of bushes growing there.
Right.
And the worst thing is I tried to get out and push it from behind, and ended up falling down the hill a little bit, and it was all thorn bushes and shit.
Oh.
We ended up walking for maybe 2 hours to finally get someone to tow it.
That was really dumb to have you learn how to do a stick shift on a road like that.
Yeah. But he and I went through an amazing amount of bullshit, all his fault. He was into way too many drugs and drinking and this, that, and the other. He was always telling me about these parties and how fun they were and how he'd never invite me to any of them. But frankly, I wouldn't have belonged at any of them. But he would come knock on my window at 3 a.m. and I'd say, all right, let me get my car, I'll take you home, that kind of thing. He could trust me for that kind of shit, and we could talk philosophically. Right. But after I told him about the tumor, he said his mom gave him $5 to take me out to lunch, because that's kind of what you do when you hear bad news like that. He didn't even do that. He put it in his gas tank, and I never saw him after that.
What I've found is there's a lot of people who, number one, they don't know how to respond. It scares them, and so they'll pull away. That happened after my daughter died, because how are you supposed to be around parents who had a child die? And rather than And I did that to some friends that their son died in a freak ski accident. They were friends, and we used to ski with them. And it was like, what do you do? I didn't understand it until my daughter died. So, and I was able, fortunately, because I worked at the same company as the gentleman, and I was able to tell him why I wasn't, you know, we pulled away because I had no clue on what to do. And I guess that's one of the blessings of losing somebody close, is because you begin to understand. And so I do understand there's this, I don't know what to do, this whole idea scares me, and so we'll just pretend it doesn't exist and go over here.
Who wants to see someone you like crumble?
Yeah, and it also challenges our ideas about what is strength.
And also it allows other people to realize their own mortality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if they don't know how to deal with it, they might freak out.
Right. Right. And then there's also, you have people in your life who hang around because of something that we provide, and is no longer able to be provided. So, you know, so there's a lot of reasons people hang together, and not all of them are for the benefit of the other person. And that's the way it is, but I think I think we're both the same way. I've never wanted a whole bunch of friends, ever. You know, one or two that are really close.
That concept is growing on me, getting more friends. I've had some really, really tight, close friends for a really long time. And frankly, I find myself burdening them sometimes. And I figure if I knew more people, then at least I could distribute the load a little bit. You know, an engineering term.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I just have too many stupid problems. I shouldn't have it. I just can't deal with things. I need some psychological help, in addition to physical therapy. And I just refuse to dump that on my friends anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I can tell them about it, but I don't expect any help or assistance anymore.
Well, and since you don't drive, I mean, you do need that type of help.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of areas where people can provide that, but not very many people have the skill or knowledge to help somebody psychologically, other than just listening.
But I have found myself saying to, there was a trip to the emergency room, and they asked me how I got there, and like, well, a neighbor dropped me off. Like, well, how are you getting home? Well, I'm going to call another friend, you know, because I let them know I'm here. It's like, wow, you got really nice friends. And it's like, well, it helps be nice to them.
Yeah.
You know, if you're nice to other people, then more likely they'll be nice to you too.
Right.
And if it's too much to ask, either you don't ask, or they can tell you that's too much to ask.
Well, if they're friends, then hopefully there's this agreement that if you're not able to do it, just let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know my life exists only on the gratuity of others, the generosity of others. That's the word I was looking for. Because I only live on disability, which means the government, the people are paying taxes for me to continue breathing.
Right.
So that's my government job, is to continue breathing. You know, if they're going to pay me to live, I may as well give it my best shot.
Yep. And do it in a way that maybe there's something you offer back, which, from what I've seen, is how you've decided to live.
I'm trying. You know, being friends, to me, doesn't sound like much of an offer, but when people appreciate it, it's a solid thing.
Well, why do we say friendship is so important? And if we're not a friend, then so there is that need, because we do need each other. And I learned when I broke my foot. I have a neighbor down the street, and she was on stress leave. She's an RN. And anyway, she learned that I broke my foot, and so she said, well, I'm home. I'll provide transportation wherever you need to go. So I could still teach, because she would drive me to school. She'd pick me up. And we got to really know each other so much better, and it was cool. And she shared that she was getting depressed because she was home all the time, and she wasn't ready to go back to work yet, so it gave her meaning in her life. And she was like my angel. And since she's back to work and I have a good foot, we hardly see each other anymore. Mm-hmm. It's really a bummer. Mm-hmm. So it sometimes it's good to have a reason so people feel that they are helping.
And I like the word angel that you used, even though it sounds pretty much like neither one of us are terribly religious believers.
No.
But I have decided that my friends are very similar to angels, mm-hmm. Even though I don't believe in that kind of stuff. And then I've also, and this is probably more due to the insomnia and medication, I can envision people being both angels and devils and things like mm-hmm. that. One of the pieces of scripture one of the Jehovah's Witnesses that knocked on my door read was something about the cord, the silver cord. And I interrupted her. I'm like, do you know what the silver cord is? She's like, no, it's just something in the Bible. And I'm like, well, in some philosophies, that cord connects you to either the earth or heaven or something. It's a cord that connects you to the universe. You know, it's a deep philosophy. And when people say you cut that cord, you know, you're now out of the universe, things like that. I gotta stop using that expression, things like that. It's superfluous verbiage. I hate that. Anyways, I'm talking too much again. The cord, for some people, it's just a straight cord. You know, just whether it goes down or up, either way, we'll say it goes up. For some people, the angel-like ones, there's more of like a spring where they can take, yeah, and it's happy, and they can bounce around, they can float around. And other people, they wear the cord like it's chains. There's just too much around them, and it's bogging them down. And those aren't really the demons, but they're the demonic. You know, they're the ones that are depressed and just, you know, can't see anything good.
And can be convinced to do some things that can be pretty devastating to those around them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I
would say those conditions draw in forces that, yeah. Because it is curious. There was a period, it was a few years ago, I don't know how long ago, I have a hard time, but
I've got to check the energy level, and it's good.
Well, you can turn that off anytime. Anyway, where these kids were killing their parents. It was in the paper, and it was like every week there was another, and it was in every child that killed their parents, and they usually were in that really confusing adolescent, early teen age. They heard voices telling them to do it. And, you know, we say, oh, well, there's no such thing as angels, and you know. But I have a feeling there are forces that feed. And we feed forces dependent upon, and we decide who we're going to feed. Whether it's through joy, and it draws in forces that feed on joy, or we draw in forces that feed on suffering and misery. I really prefer the joyful ones.
and like my example with the question, some people misinterpret it. I could be saying something that I think is happy and joyful, and they'll take it the wrong way.
Oh yeah.
And that confuses me no end. I'm like, well, how could you take that from that? You know, and sometimes I can bring it up to them, and they go, all right, yeah, I'm having a bad day, I'm thinking about other shit. I've only heard that once. I've heard other things many times, though.
But what if we, especially when we're all self-absorbed, we are residing in our own little created world, and everything we see outside is this world we've created, and we're not seeing really what's there at all. So we have our own little bubble world that we're hot, and so everything is interpreted by this bubble world we've created. And so anything that I would do that isn't not nice, we think everybody else is going to do it too, because I live in my bubble world. And if I'm not nice to anybody, nobody else is going to be nice to me. I live in my bubble world. So I have a feeling we create our own separation by living in our own little bubble worlds and not letting it go so that we can see beyond it.
Do you know what a solipsism is?
I've heard the word and I cannot remember the definition.
My solipsism would be that I'm the only thing in this universe and everything is a part of my imagination or my perception. That can be true, but it's also true for you, that you are in your own world and everything is, you know, there for you. So how do we interact? You know, well, we develop social skills and, you know, behave well. So I don't know where I was going with that. I think that's...
Well, a piece of that has to do with language. And sometimes I'm amazed that we even have a grasp of what the other person's saying, because every word is, the definition is based on experience, on feeling. My first real example of having the same word and two totally different definitions was a friend of mine. We lived together for 17 years, but when we were getting to know each other, you know, I thought I liked to hike because I was a big hiker then. And he, oh, I do too. And I thought, oh, cool, maybe we can go hiking together. Well, his view of a hike was a mile or two through some prepared, you know, kind of out in the country. Me, a hike was 15 miles with rock climbing in between. We used the very same word. And we discovered that I enjoyed his kind of hike, but he really didn't enjoy my kind of hike.
Yeah, I similar experiences. You know what role-playing games are? Dungeons and Dragons, things like that?
Yeah, I know people who have really enjoyed them. I think life has enough role-playing, so
yes,
I don't.
Yes.
Right.
Well, being a young kid, living on 3 3/4 acres, 20 miles from town, and having these D&D books to read, it was pretty fascinating.
Right, right.
But the rules specifically say that these are just guidelines. You know, if you guys want to make up your own shit, go ahead. You know, they don't say that specifically. Right. And to me, there was dice and game and, you know, papers and maps, and sometimes you had to calculate things. I was at a friend's apartment and they go, well, we're going to do a role-playing game. I'm like, oh, cool, you know, it was superheroes, you know, I'm used to dragons and crap, but whatever. Okay. And they just start talking. I'm like, well, where's the maps and the dice and the paper? Like, no, this is all in our head. Like, completely? You know, I'm like, what are the rules? You know, how do I play this? I'm like, okay, well, my character is going to do this. They go, oh, well, we'll make up something and this happens. And that was a little too creative for me. You know, I needed more structure.
Yeah.
You know, I as an engineer, I got to look at it, okay, it'd be more efficient to go this route than this route, because this is more towards my goal and that's not. And it was just a complete open sandbox with them. And that really boggled my mind. But it was very nice to see something completely different.
Yeah. That just brought to mind, I have one of the companions in our circle. He loves looking at the original Hebrew writings of, and this one term that's, make my path straight. In Hebrew, if you translate it directly from the Hebrew, it is, take me on the most circuitous route to my destination quickest. And what you're talking about just brought that to mind. Because we're going do, and finally we get here unexpectedly, yet without all this going back and forth and seeming to be lost for a while, we would have never gotten there.
Okay, so now I'm starting to get a little peckish, thinking we should go eat. You up for that?
Okay, what time is it?
It's a little afternoon.
Okay, I left Maggie at. All right, so we'll do that.
Do we have time?
Yeah, it'll have to be probably. Well, let's switch this guy off.
All right.
Bye.
So, thank you, Penelope.
You are welcome.
All right.
All right.